Hi, shalom friends. Do you think it's possible to paint a beautiful painting if you have no talent for painting at all? Well, superficially, or initially is a better word. Initially, I would say, of course not. I mean, if you don't know how to paint, how can you produce a beautiful painting? But actually, it's not really true because it was very popular in my days growing up. It was called paint by number. I don't know if they still have that, but you could buy like a set of 4 or 5 portraits. Of course, it was blank, but the outline was there, and there was color by number. And essentially, if you followed the counters and you followed the numbers, you were able to produce fairly decent painting. Now, I actually never got it right. So by me, a lot of times the borders merged. But I remember my sister did one of these color by number paintings. The effect was so nice. It was so seamless. We actually hung it up. And then we got a kick out of when people would say, "Who painted that picture?" It would be my sister. Wow. But of course, it was paint by number. Well, here's another question. If you have no talent in cooking, is it possible to make a very tasty dish? And the answer is yes, if you follow directions of the cookbook, of a recipe. So here you are, you're not a cook, and if you ever experimented, it would come out horrible. But if you follow instructions, what will happen is you'll have a very tasty dish. And we could keep on going on. And certainly when it comes to health, we would, if you follow instructions of taking the medicine at this and this time, or the pharmacist follows the instructions of what to mix, we have an elixir. We have something that will help you. God forbid if you decide instead of doing this to do something else, you'll have the opposite. Well, this leads us to a very obvious and true statement, and that is Hashem has given us detailed instructions on how to connect to Him. We could make beautiful paintings, we could make tasty dishes, we could create spiritual beauty. And not only that, spiritual excellence, if we follow instructions. So, for example, it comes on Friday, God says, light the candles. It has to be done before sunset, not after. And if you're wearing your tefillin, it's supposed to be a square, not rounded. And so on and so forth. The more we keep to the instructions, the more wholesome, the more beautiful, the more effective the mitzvah, the commandment, the connection becomes. In the mystical tradition, actually the soul itself can be likened to a rope, and the soul, which in itself is a spiritual being, a spiritual entity of mitzvot, i.e., let me try to explain this in a less mystical way. Our soul is a part of God. The way it connects us to Hashem, it's a part of God put into a human body, and now the body too is a holy body to be connected to God. How do we do that? The answer is by doing the commandments, or by doing the mitzvot. The reason why I don't like the word commandments is because the word mitzvot means by availing ourselves of opportunities to connect. Mitzvot means to connect. So it has been likened to a rope. Imagine a rope that, you could even see this today sometimes by places where they're working on a building. It's 4 stories high, and the guy on the 4th floor wants to attract the attention of the guy on the ground floor. And he wants him to send up some materials. So often there's like a pulley or sometimes a rope. And the guy on the 4th floor shakes the rope, moves the rope, and then when the guy downstairs on the ground floor sees the rope moving, he looks up and says, "What's going on, Frank?" He says, "Send it up." And sure enough, he says, "I'm preparing it. When I'm ready to send it up, look at the rope. When you see it wiggle, you'll know that I'm sending it up." So essentially, the rope connects distances from the above to the below. It makes no difference how high the above is, whether it be 4 stories or 40 stories or 400 stories. If the rope would be long enough, then if you shake the rope on the top, it will be eventually seen on the bottom. And when you wiggle it on the bottom, eventually the one on the top will see it. So those are the mitzvot, the strands that connect us to God. The rabbis tell us that if you could imagine a rope, a thick rope, that has 613 threads, or more correctly, strands to it, then we could imagine a soul that has 613 commandments that connect it to Hashem. And therefore, when a person on earth puts on the tefillin, keeps kosher, gives charity, makes a blessing, does an act of decency and kindness, a mitzvah, he's connecting to God, suddenly the effect of that is felt in heaven, because the rope connects us from above to below. If, heaven forbid, however, we deliberately flaunt, we deliberately omit, we deliberately go against Hashem, so then that would be the equivalent of taking that strand and cutting it. And of course, if you keep cutting the strands of a thick cord, it will get weaker and weaker. By the way, and this is not for today's YouTube, there's a part of this cord that can never be severed, because no Jew can ever be cut off from God. But in many other ways, we strengthen our connection through the commandments, so the cord gets thicker and stronger, or we could weaken it. So our destiny, to a certain extent, is in our hands. To follow the instructions, to be connected, and to be strengthened. Let me close with a child's parable, but it's telling all the same. They tell many years ago of a rich man who was very, very kind. And one day, a poor boy knocked on the door, and the lady of the house opened, and the poor boy said, I don't need anything to eat, but I really have no clothing. Would you perhaps have some extra clothing? She was a good-natured lady. She said, our children have grown up. We never threw out the clothing. They were so good. They're upstairs in the attic. If you want, go upstairs to the attic. We have some trunks. Open up the trunks. If there's anything that fits, by all means, take it in good health. And this was for him like the equivalent of us going to Macy's with unlimited shopping. Fantastic. He went upstairs to the attic. There were 2 trunks. He opened it up. And sure enough, he found some shirts and a pair of pants. He was very excited. And he collected a nice pile. And then he realized he had no bag. Couldn't wear all of the shirts at one time. So he was looking, what could he do to keep the bundle together? And he noticed an interesting thing. He noticed that on this, it was a low attic. There was a hook. There was a rope. And there was a rope hanging. He figured, they're so good-natured that they allow me to have clothing. They probably wouldn't mind if I cut off a piece of the rope. So what he did was, he took out a little pocket knife, and he sawed off a piece of the rope to use to tie the clothing. And as soon as he finished the last strand of cutting, he heard a terrific bang, and the house literally shuddered. He had no idea what had just happened. A couple of minutes later, the lady of the house runs up the stairs, sees the boy with the pocket knife, sees the rope that was cut, says, "What have you done? What have you done?" And the child says, "What have I done? I don't know. What did I do?" She says, "Don't you realize that rope that you cut was the actual rope that held the chandelier? Our magnificent chandelier that was in the living room had to be held. So there was a rope at the edge of the chandelier. We made a little hole in the ceiling, and we ran that rope all the way up to the attic, and it was anchored on the attic. When you cut that rope, the chandelier fell, and I have a tremendous loss of thousands of rubles." And of course, the poor boy said, "I'm sorry. I had no idea that a little rope could hold such an expensive item. And this wonderful little story is often a reminder to us about a mitzvah. We say, okay, maybe it is a rope between us and heaven, but what's so terrible if I don't put on tefillin today? What's so terrible if I don't keep the Shabbat? What's so terrible if I don't keep kosher? What's so terrible? It's just a small indiscretion. But you know something? The ropes that connect us to God is much more than that. It also connects God to the world. And by not doing a mitzvah, who knows what kind of a damage could happen? Far more damaging than a chandelier being held by rope. On the other hand, let's always conclude with something positive, that with each small mitzvah, whether it be putting a quarter into the charity box, or whether it be stealing a couple of minutes or looking into a chumash or an act of kindness, we could actually strengthen, and the chandelier will shine and bring more radiance and more light to this world. Shalom.